Taking a moment, waiting for guests to come in. Just for the sake of posterity, I meant to start 5 minutes early, but there were things to do. All right, anybody coming in? Let's see. So, hey, welcome. So as people come in, I'll say hello and good evening. My name is Nathan, or Bardic Punk on TikTok. So what I'm planning for this evening is maybe an hour or two, share a few poems that haven't been presented on TikTok. And, to say hello, answer any questions that come up if I can. And I've got a story planned, so a little storytelling, kind of getting the bugs worked out. This is my first ever live, so awesome. I see many people coming in. Welcome. As a sneak preview, so I have a poem that's appropriate to the season that is specifically about the ancestors. As we're coming up on the season of Samhain. This one combines several different aspects of what I consider bardic work to be, but it is in praise of ancestors. I have a story which is part of what I call new mythology. It's a myth that didn't previously exist. It is a fable, so a story with little meaning in it. It's called Anansi and the Priest. And I'd like to read one of the longer poems. There are several that I've written that are just a little too long for TikTok. So I'll present them in these live sessions. Not memorized, they're a bit long for that, but I still like to share them. And then I did have a poem request. I haven't seen yet if Quinn was here, but there was a poem requested. I'll fit that in. Let's see. See people coming and going, seeing what's up. So I should probably get started, huh? Oh, there we go. Thank you. See likes coming up. All right. So the first poem is the one that I've managed to hold in memory for tonight. What I consider the true bardic style is doing everything from memory, but there's only so much space when this is your evening work. The poem is called Underfoot. So, we're over a dozen, or 11. Good. Welcome to those who are coming in and going and forth. All right, Underfoot. Hello. So we got Chloe. I raise up my cup to the ancestors crushed, upon whose smashed bones we must rise, who stood in the way of the powerful cruel and were ground down to raise up our time. They stood in the way of the cruel and corrupt and called out each crime by its name, were cursed and reviled by ignorant peers, then tortured, convicted, and slain. Yes, soldiers are slain in uncounted droves, defending each land from its foes. But I praise here the fighters who bettered their lands and fought against horrors at home. A foreigner might slay you with hardly a thought, or worse, kill you slowly with spite. But foes upon thrones can pronounce you unwhole and injure life long before fate. Not only robbed of their blood and their bone, though murder was often their end. The ones who stood up against villainous strength oft suffered long cruelty and pain. Yet knowing this all, still the protesters rose, unkneeling where injustice reigned, and most were not victors, or even remembered, and most did not see any change. Yet still did they come, and still did they cry, mounding up mountains of dead, till the middens grew up even taller than lies, and buried the villains instead. So join me in praising the dead I now hail, dissenters, protesters, defiers. Give thanks for the increments painfully gained, and know that their numbers still rise. Hail the ancestors. And welcome to others that have come in. Questions? Is this church? No. I do sometimes do bardic work in ritual and for liturgical or worship purposes. Certainly I've used that poem as an invocation to ancestors, to the beloved dead. But no, right now it's just some entertainment, poetry, questions and answers. And the other question was, do I like dragons? I do generally. More in the abstract. I think in person they might like me a little too much. My flavor and texture. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of dragons in art. That is, I don't have a lot of it around. But the concept is wonderful. And I have friends who actually work with dragon spirits in their magic and their worship. So I always got to be respectful. I see people coming and going. Followers, that's awesome. Pause for a moment. I think the next thing I want to do is another poem, which is itself a story. You probably noticed if you followed my channel that I have a particular reverence, appreciation for Hermes, the Greek god. His patron and helper of sorts, helps me with communication work like this. So appreciate his work on getting me to this point to be able to host a live. So the poem I have to read tonight is what I consider an epic. It's a longer poem. It is for Hermes, and it's another new myth. That is, it's a story that didn't actually happen in mythology that we know of, but it could have. It's called Wind Chaser. And if you're not entirely familiar with Greek mythology, the winds are considered elemental spirits, beings and gods in their own right, with personifications like the rest of them. They are known collectively as the anemoi, or the winds. So the poem was me getting interested in the concept of these individual gods, these winds. And there is a myth that does exist where they misbehaved, as many of the old elemental titanic spirits did. And the gods had to round them up and get them imprisoned. But they didn't go down in Tartarus with some of the more problematic titans. They went into a prison held by a King Aeolus. So you'll hear him mentioned. And there they're kept. And depending on the myth, they occasionally break out. That's when the different winds come to us, as they've broken out of prison and then they get hauled back in and imprisoned again. Or they're allowed out one at a time to do their work, and then they have to come back. This story tells about a time when they all broke out, a jailbreak, and someone, the most qualified, of course, among the gods, went out to collect them. It's my tea, keep my speaking voice going. So, Wind Chaser. Hermes, my beloved son, my fathers used to creed, attend me on Olympus, for the human world has need. Aeolus's gates are fallen, and the 12 winds have escaped. I bid you find them where they hide, stop each and give them chase. Unceasing gales wreck homes and sails, and storms assault the land. Pursue these rebel anemoi and get them back in hand. Now, of the Grecian deities, I'm certainly the fastest, but not the strongest. I work out, but no match for the elements. The ancient winds are primal things, and stronger when they're running. Fortunately, amongst the gods, I'm also the most cunning. I led my quest with Zephyrus, the warm wind of the east. Of all the winds the gentlest, I hoped he'd fight the least. I found him in a flowered field, with fawns and nymphs cavorting, and asked him kindly to return. But he'd not leave his sporting. I may be fair and friendly-faced, but never think me tame. I'll not be taken lightly. I know, let's play a game. No, not a sport. That's in your court. I'd be too quickly bested. How about a game of stratagems in which our wits are tested? I agreed and gave him lead, and beat him easily. Yes, I cheated. But to his word the east stood good, and gracefully retreated. Notice, fiery southern wind, was next most easily tracked. I found him scorching orchards till the fields were dry and cracked. At first approaching cautiously, not wanting to be seen, I saw he'd burn the farmers if I didn't intervene. By Zeus's name, I threatened him, leave off these cruel crimes. Surrender now and come with me to serve your sentence time. Instead, the hothead roared and dodged, by my authority unturned. I had to dodge and hop away to keep my heels unburned. But by his ire the breath of fire was soon enough exhaled. I waited till his ire was spent, then dragged him off to jail. The third I found was Boreas, the northern chilly brute, another none too friendly, but not prone to hot pursuit. He instead ignored my words, rebuffing my advances. He much preferred to drive his herds and join them in their dances. For hours I watched him tend to them, observing loving care. When on a hunch, I joined the bunch, disguising as a mare. Employing a distraction I had learned in northern tales, I led the love-struck stallion along a merry trail. The hunted turned the hunter, he pursued me several days, until I led him back, unwary, through the prison gates. With these 3 of 4 winds caught and safely put to rest, I next sought out cool Eurus, the weird wind of the west. Stealthy and mysterious, he proved quite hard to find. I tracked his ways for several days, through clues he'd left behind. A ship spun round in circles, or a blizzard blown of leaves, are just the sort of enigmas the west wind likes to weave. But after days without success, my worn mind felt defective, until I realized who I was, a rogue, not a detective. I overturned a whole town's roofs, a prank of similar structure, then captured mazed Eurus when he stopped to stand in wonder. Rounding up the other winds became a simpler matter. Once the cardinal 4 were caught, the rest were lost and scattered. Caecius came quietly when his hailstones were depleted. Scyron, too, the eldest, was by climate change defeated. I bested lips by racing ships. My secret is row from the hips. Phoenicius, predictable, was all too easily tracked and tripped. And when I'd gathered all that lot, I merely asked politely, and Thracius, Erotinus, and Lobotinus came quietly. The last breeze lost, or so he thought. I heaved a heavy cough, and hurled wee maces from my lungs. He thought he pulled it off. I'd done my duty, caught them all, but surely made no friends. A grave concern, for when one flies, it helps to know the winds. So to their prison I returned, and made apologies, begging pardon for my tricks in service of my duties. They all stood unmoved, all cold and still, until I offered trade. Would they forgive my dire offense if I arranged escapes? I'd slip each from Aeolus's hold when they required a break, and they'd return when time was up, just for appearance sake. Our bargain struck, we parted ways, if not with perfect trust. But I believe I'll win again if I'm ever double-crossed. Hail, Hermes. I see Lillian. Hello. Glad you got here for that. My fellow Hermes appreciator. Just like there's a couple of us here. No, okay, it's 3 + 2. Good. I wasn't sure whether to expect a dozen, half a dozen, 1,000. I'm sure that would have stressed me even more, so. Yep. Hi. Awesome. I'm going to pause for a moment if anybody has any questions or other things to bring up. Next thing I have planned is a long one. Like I say again, Quinn, I've got the poem you requested, Antifa's Everywhere. If you are here, let me know. I'll take a moment and present that one. It's only about 15 minutes for those two. Wow, I read too fast. Okay, might as well get into it. So as promised, this is a fable. It's a story with a meaning, but it's also for entertainment purposes and not as short as Aesop's fables. This one is called Anansi and the Priest. It is an Anansi story, but then again, aren't they all? So it begins, pardon me. It begins on a fine summer's day when Anansi was traveling in his favorite forest, taking his time, and it was a beautiful time to be traveling. The trees were ripening with fruit, the sun was warm and generally comfortable, and the forest was alive. So Anansi was making his way across the treetops as he does, until below him he heard a horrible sound, wailing and pounding and whining. Curious, he decided to drop from the trees to see what was the matter. And there he found a man, a tall, lean, dark cloaked man in robes that were patched and dusty from travels. He came up and poked at the man, who was crying and beating at his head. Said, "Excuse me, why are you making such a racket here in the beautiful forest?" If the man was surprised to be addressed by a giant talking spider, he didn't give much sign. He looked up, dried his eyes, and said, "Oh, hello. Well, I'm a priest, a traveling priest, and I've come from far away to bring word of my God. I'm trying to find people who will worship him and give him offerings so that they may prosper, and through them I will prosper." Anansi nodded. "That sounds like a very good end. As a god, I certainly approve. I take it it's not going well." The priest answered, "No, I have not received a single offering. I'm not sure what's going wrong." Anansi said, "Well, what are you telling them?" The priest said, "I told you, I serve a great and glorious God, and if they will give him offerings, he will bless all their works so that they become even more prosperous." Anansi scratched his head. "You didn't tell them a story?" "A what?" "Oh, a story. You don't know what a story is?" "Look, it's when you tell things one at a time, in order, so that people know what happened." The priest nodded his head. "Oh, I know what you mean, an anecdote. Yes, we have those, but I generally just say what happens, and that's it." Anansi shook his head. "Well, no wonder you're not getting anyone. Look, I know about stories. Trust me, I own them all. They work great for this kind of thing. You need to tell them about a case where this happened, where someone you know gave what they have and received a blessing in return." The priest shook his head. "All right, I think I know what you mean. There's a village further on down this road. I'm going to go over there and tell them a story, and you say I'll get those offerings." Anansi nodded. "Definitely. And good luck." They parted ways. Anansi went back up into the trees, and the priest hurried down the road to the village. Anansi took his time traveling, picking his way through the treetops, sampling the fruit he found, not worrying too much about anything, until he heard a familiar and horrible sound, louder than before, wailing and crying and pounding. He descended from the trees once again, dreading what he would find. And sure enough, it was the priest, who was walking back the way he had come, from the way he had come, pounding at his forehead, at his temples, pulling at his thinning hair, and crying, "Why am I such a poor priest? I am so sorry, my God." Anansi descended and stopped him. It didn't go so well, did it? The priest said, "No, it did not. I did just what you said." Anansi shook his head. "Clearly you didn't. Look, what did you tell them?" The priest said, "I said, in my land, there was once a man who gave up everything he owned to the great God of the skies. And he was blessed beyond belief. His life was enriched, and he became prosperous." Anansi said, "Who are we talking about?" The priest said, "Me. I use what I know. You don't look very prosperous." "Well, I'm rich in spirit." "Mm-hmm. All right. Sorry. That's not one of my stories. That's a cheap imitation knockoff. Mine are much better. Look, if you just tell people about other people, especially people they can see, of course they're not going to believe you. They don't know anything different than what they've observed, and they've never seen anything like what you're talking about." The priest scratched his head. "It sounds like you're talking about lying." Anansi shook his head. No. A good story is always true. A good story is actually truer than the truth itself, because it helps people believe what's right, what's true. The priest said, "Oh, you get past their doubts." Anansi shook his head. "There you go. You've got it. Look, unless you have someone in mind, let's not use people. I find in these cases, animals make better characters. Humans don't necessarily know animals as well. It's a little outside of their experience. And talking animals work even better. So, why don't you use some animals, real characters, and don't just say blessings and offerings. Make it a metaphor, a thing that's like what you're talking about, but a little different. That way, people understand it before they know what you're talking about, before they understand what they're understanding. You follow me?" The priest nodded hesitantly. "This still sounds a bit false." Anansi said, No. Again, it's a story. It's true. All right. Now, why don't you go back to that village and try again, just like we discussed? And the priest nodded. "All right. I'll give it a try. Thank you again for your help." Anansi said, "Think nothing of it. Look, once you're successful, once you're prosperous, just tell them you used one of Anansi's stories, and that endorsement will be my payment. All right, get going." Heaving a sigh, he hauled himself back up into the treetops. By that point, it was getting late. The sun was starting to set. And Anansi decided that it was time for some sleep. So he wove himself a hammock and snuggled in to get rest. He was awoken in the early moments of dawn by a familiar and horrible sound. It was certainly the priest again. Anansi was not so much annoyed to be woken up. He could just barely forgive the man for that. But he remembered his advice, and he was deeply offended that someone had gone and told one of his stories and had not been successful. It's a very bad look, bad advertising. So Anansi hauled himself out of his cocoon and lowered himself down to the forest, just in time to catch the back of the wondering priest, still blubbering and miserable. He called out, "Hey, you! What's going on? Didn't you tell a story like I told you?" The priest turned around and wiped his eyes and said, "Yes, I did." Anansi said, "What story did you use? Let's see if we can figure this out." The priest said, "I told them that once there was a lion, a great and mighty lion, who had killed a water buffalo, an enormous beast. It was so huge that he could not eat all the meat himself. So he called out to the vultures of the sky and said, 'I will share this meat with you if you will aid me.' And they shared the meat. And then later, when that lion was in danger and about to be killed by a hunter, the vultures cried out to warn him and swooped and pecked at the hunter and protected him. Right? But they laughed at me." Anansi shook his head again. "That is not one of my stories. Where are you finding these garbage knockoff? Look, here's the problem. These people know lions. They know vultures. First of all, a male lion doesn't take down a water buffalo. Not by himself, certainly. Second, lions do not share their meat. They leave some behind maybe by accident, but they don't give away any. And vultures, even if they were given food, would not help a lion. If anything, they'd probably call out to the hunter to tell him where to find a lion and make more meat for them. Your story included things that people already know about in ways that they couldn't believe." The priest huffed. "So you are talking about lying?" Anansi shook his head again. "No, come on. See, you're focusing on the details of the story. I'm focusing on the message. See, the message is true, but you have to get it across to make it more true than the truth." The priest looked skeptical and said, "All right, what do you suggest?" Anansi said, "Your problem is you're keeping it still too close to home. You need to make things a little more abstract. And like I said, specific characters, not just a lion, but a specific lion that you're talking in your story about. Make things grander, more mystical, more interesting. Make it so far outside of their experience that they can't doubt you, that it's possible maybe it did happen." Now, the priest at this point had looked like he'd had enough, but he nodded, thought about it, and said, "All right, I can't go back empty-handed. I will try. But if this doesn't work, I'm sorry. I know you did what you could." Anansi did not appreciate being patronized, but he too said, all right. Go on your way." Now Anansi went back up to his bed, and the priest went back to the village. Eventually, Anansi woke up at midday when the sun was blazing hot, but he did not hear any crying and wailing and pounding. Oh, thank goodness. All right. Eventually, that man had to succeed if he actually used one of my stories. But because it was so hot and so bright, Anansi decided that he would not travel all that day. He would go to the village that was just nearby and introduce himself, request a bed to sleep in and a meal. So he made his way to the village, dropped down, and approached the first villager he saw, an older woman. He said, "Greetings! I am the great Anansi, come to grace your village with my presence. All I require of you is a place to rest and a good meal." The woman looked startled and then downcast, and she answered, "Oh, great Anansi, we are indeed honored to have you. And we can certainly make a place for you to rest, but we have no food to offer you." Anansi stared at her in disbelief. No food? It is the height of the harvest season. There's fruit everywhere. Surely you have hunters. There is game to hunt. And the woman said, oh, we will have food again, but right now we don't have any at all. Why don't you have any food? Said Anansi. Well, we offered it to the great sky spirit. The priest. Anansi asked her, dreading the answer, what are you talking about? Why would you give up all your food? The woman said, well, a priest came to our village 3 times. The first time, he told us a foolish story about how a man gave up everything he owned and was blessed by a god. And we laughed at him. The second time, he told us an even sillier story about a lion who gave meat to vultures, and we laughed at him again. But the third time, he told a new story about a king, a lion who was the great king of all the forests in a land far away, where he had come from. And this lion wanted to better the lives of his subjects. So he made a bargain with the great spirit of the sky through his servants, the birds of the air. He took a portion of their kills and gave it to the sky spirit through the birds, and in return received blessings. The birds would warn them when danger came near and would help them find good kills, good food. And so the lions prospered and were great. He told us that if we too made offerings to the great sky spirit, we would prosper in the same way. Our elders decided that to get the best possible blessing, we would offer everything we had. Anansi looked at her. Everything. Yes, it only made sense. Anansi said, well, thank you. Thank you for telling me, and I appreciate your offer, but I think I need to go. Anansi hurried back along the road in the direction he thought the priest might have taken to offer the man some new advice. That is Anansi and the priest. I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to pause again for a moment to get some tea. Thank you. It's interesting. I see we had a lot of people come and go. I think that's pretty normal. Thanks. Did I miss anybody? Hello. Odesali, thanks for joining us. It's about 7:30, so I'll have some more poems. I hope everybody is settled in comfortably tonight. It's very cold and wet here. We're up in northwest Pennsylvania, chilled down, and it's pouring. It's perfect October weather. Oh, hey, now is a perfect time to mention, put it on the record for those of you who are here, I'm going to be doing another live next Thursday evening. It's a decent day and time for me generally. I may move them around if it helps other people to be able to attend. But next Thursday, as it's coming up on Halloween, and because I have a pretty good store of appropriately scary stories and poetry and songs, I'll be doing a live or unalive. I'll put up the announcement here this weekend, which will be entirely creepy, crawly, Halloween-themed work. A ghost story, which I have several written, some creepy poems, and I have a song that I'm working on that should be ready just in time. It's called Human Beings Are Dumb. It's not very complimentary, but then again. All right. I had a request Hey, good. Something to talk on. How did I get into storytelling? Well, again, I use the title Bardic Punk. I am a bard in training, so learning the ropes, as it were, working on my memorization, working on learning lore, how these things work. And the punk part is because I try not to be too bound by conventions, to do whatever works. And I do a lot of political and protest type of poetry. Those might have noticed that have come on my channel. But originally, why I started doing storytelling was, well, okay, twofold. I did role-playing storytelling, dungeon mastering, being a live-action role-playing storyteller for a vampire LARP out in Buffalo. And I enjoyed it greatly. I had tried writing a little bit in high school, but I didn't really stick with it. I thought I was going into the hard sciences. But in role-playing, and especially in LARPing, I could make up new stories, invent characters, had a great time. I stuck with that for about 7 years through graduate school. The other thing then that got me back into storytelling and into the more bardic aspects was my local druidic grove. It's Whispering Lake Grove here in Erie and surrounding areas. Asked me to tell a story, a bit of mythology that I was pretty familiar with. I think the first one was the death of the Norse god Balder the Bright, who was slain by his brother Hoder the Dark with a little help by Loki. Go figure how Loki got involved. So I told the story as Hoder, blindfolded, and it was great. I mean, not only was it well received as an offering for the actual ritual being done, the audience appreciated. I really had a great time writing and presenting it, and just kept going from there. Originally, and this is live storytelling specifically. I had been writing in the background, so my friend and co-writer there, Lillian, had come up with a space role-playing setting idea, and we wrote a lot of short stories to get into the setting. Again, that transition from role-playing into longer fiction. And so I'd been writing on that previously, but I hadn't really, professionally shared anything other than a few things on a website so people could see what we were doing. That snowballed heavily. Now there are 5 Empyrean Dreams books. No, not trying to promote too much, but I'm very proud of that progression. And the writing then came into a more general fiction, and then essays, and then specifically short stories and myths. So that's the storytelling aspect. I started more doing live storytelling, more improvisational, and gradually got up to the point where they were concrete, constructed stories, not just retelling someone else's lore and not just writing it down for others to read, but telling the story myself. And I've done it at festivals and rituals and a couple just campfire bardic type things, and now on TikTok. So again, for those of you who are listening, I appreciate it. It's a new venue. It's a new way to practice the craft. I was saying earlier that I feel like I pervert the medium a little bit of TikTok, because this conversational thing is not much of what I do on my channel. The channel is a place to share new works, old works that I've loved. It's a place to bring eyes onto the things that I love and have created. And then hopefully you'll go and read stories elsewhere, or hear some of my longer form poems on YouTube. There's a lot on my YouTube channel for the last 3 or 4 years. That was even pre-pandemic. The poetry, I blame on the pandemic largely. Before that, all I'd been writing was little bits of liturgy, so bits to use in ritual, like Underfoot, that first poem I recited, as well as individual learning poems, like about the runes. I've been presenting those on TikTok because they're nice little short poems for each of the Norse Elder Futhark runes. I'm almost done with the set, And there is a capstone poem that'll be presented at the end too, going down the entire list. And I just started doing them on the Irish Celtic Ogham, that symbol and writing set. So there's lots of material there for a pagan and aspiring bard to get into. But obviously some of the other things I do, political rants. I've written political short stories, allegories, also fables. I'll certainly be presenting some of those on future TikTok lives. This one I wanted to stick more into the bardic side of things. Let's see. Like I said, I had one particular person who was interested in a particular poem, and I hope I didn't miss them. I'll certainly read it before the end of the live, just in case they see it later. What do I want to do now? Of course, requests as best as I can and fit them. I certainly want to follow up. I've got a box back here with a file of all the poems that I printed. Specifically, I tend to print them for archiving. I don't entirely trust computers. And to have something to look at to memorize from. The memorization process is interesting. Some poems it's really easy, especially ones that I've written and that I love and that are almost like in my head all the time. Like Underfoot is pretty much in my head around this time of year. But other people's poems, things like, like the Morrigan's Prophecy was one of the really tough ones. At the end of one of the great battles in Ireland's history, there's a bit of poetry that's written that supposedly the Morrigan spoke as prophecy about the future of the Tuatha and of Ireland. And that's tricky, especially in the English translation, which doesn't flow as neatly as I imagine the Gaelic does. But like I say, those are the trickier ones. They take a lot of read-throughs. I usually have a piece of paper that I can go back to each time I forget a word or a line. You know what? Actually, this is a good idea. I think Lillian's still here. I've written songs. I don't consider myself a musician or a singer. I do try to put some tunes to the songs. But I love writing lyrics. A lot of my poetry comes out sounding very sing-songy. It is essentially song lyrics in disguise. And I do have some actual songs. Most of those are on YouTube. I've given little snippets of a couple. Like, was it the beer drinking song for Breed? Was on the TikTok channel early on. But I think what I'll present is my second song for Freyja, the Norse goddess. Freyja has a special place in our home. Literally, it's right over there. Excuse me. She is the matron that brought myself and my wife together. That's a longer story for another time, but I do like to tell it. But so she has a place of honor as matron, as the homemaker. She created our home. Literally. Hello. Hi, Dan. Good to see you. I'm just about to sing if you want a bit of amusement. But I put this one to the side in case there are any music requested. So I'll go ahead and put it in here. It's called My Lady is Crying. It's one of Freyja's attributes is her tears. My lady is crying, and what is the cause? A lover is lonely, abandoned and lost. Her tears of gold amber are spilled for their sake. She weeps for all lovers left drowned in love's wake. Fair Freyja is crying, why is she dismayed? A partner is beaten, abused and betrayed. Her tears of gold amber are shed to their fear. She weeps for the torture by those they held dear. Dear mother is crying, and what is the source? A child is hungry, neglected and hurt. Her tears of gold amber are glowing with rage. She weeps for all children, abandoned or caged. Great Gaffin is crying, and why is she pained? A fool's received treasures, then broken the chain. Her tears of gold amber are what givers earn when gifts are presented, but nothing's returned. Wise Hyther is crying, why do her screams soar? Ambition is punished, tradition enforced. Her tears of gold amber are droplets of fire. They burn for all dreamers, denied their desires. Valfrey is crying, for whom does she call? The soldier she gathers, lives ended in war. Her tears of gold amber are medals to prize. She weeps not for dying, but those left alive. Horn Golden is crying, and who does she scold? The critics and cowards, retiring and cold. Her tears of gold amber should not go to waste. Life's sweeter than honey for all who will taste. Bright Mardal is crying, but why does she smile? She cries tears of pleasure for all who prevail. Her tears of gold amber are glittering sparks round all who gain glory through passionate work. Hail Freyja again. That's why I say I'm only a fair singer, not really a musician, but thank you for listening. I'm trying to get my lung capacity back up even years after living under a benzene-emitting coal plant. It's now shut down, thank goodness. But there's a few reasons I get angry about things like that, and that I appreciate the gods that got me out of that situation. But fortunately, I've avoided COVID, because it would not go well for me. You know, that's a good transition. So, I mean, I hope the person who requested, Quinn, is either watching or catches this later. And if not, the video is up on my TikTok. I had a request for a poem called Antifa's Everywhere. Unfortunately, I don't have my tinfoil hat that goes along with this. You're welcome, Lillian. Always happy to sing for you. So again, the poem is called Antifa's Everywhere. Once there were the communists conspiring everywhere, and after them the hippies with their long and flowing hair. The jazzers and the swingers spread corruption with their notes. But nowadays the deep state and Antifa are the goats. Antifa's in the Senate, Antifa's in the House, Antifa runs your local DMV. They're here, they're there, they're everywhere. They're hiding in your underwear. Antifa's hiding everywhere, you see? They call themselves the fascist foes, against them all the way. But isn't that the sort of thing a fascist goon would say? Militant, intolerant, and ready to engage. Having goals and strong beliefs is just so limp and lame. They're sad and weak and full of soy, a bunch of sissy simps who'd wipe out our republic if we gave them half an inch. Basement-sitting keyboard goons who live off welfare's teat. Organized, insidious, and armed up to the teeth. Antifa's in both parties. Antifa's underground. Antifa holds the deep state on a leash. They're here, they're there, they're everywhere. They're spraying chemtrails in the air. Antifa's hiding everywhere, I see. The Nazis are Antifa, and the Jewish bankers too. Can't trust the cops or army. I'm not sure I should trust you. Anyone could be Antifa. They've got sleeper cells. I don't think I'm compromised, but you can never really tell. The way they've got the masses fooled is such a scary feat. The media and Hollywood keep sucking from their teat. But I know better. I can see the truth behind their lies. Antifa's taking over. Wake up, sheeple. Use your eyes. Antifa's in your new PC. Antifa's in your phone. Antifa has a chip inside your head. They're here. They're there. They're everywhere. They're spread by 5G through the air. Antifa's hiding everywhere, I read. Antifa's in the boardroom. Antifa's in the streets. Antifa runs your local PTO. They're here, they're there, they're everywhere. They're just so cool, it's so unfair. Antifa's hiding everywhere, you know? It's interesting. And I like on live that I can say, by the way, this is satire. Before and after, I had a poem. And if you only saw a part of it, go back and watch it. But it starts out, can't even remember now, but it's things like, suck it up, buttercup. The world's a hard place. No one cares about your feelings. That's the first half. That's the part I'm parodying, is those people who just tell you, you know, things are tough. You just got to take it. Don't complain. Don't get offended. Rawr. The second half is explaining why that's all wrong. Why words do have effects and why they do hurt and they have real consequences in the world. But a lot of people clicked off after the first 10 seconds, and I understand they've heard too much of that bullshit. They didn't want to hear more of it. You know, toughen up, buttercup. They didn't watch it all the way through. No, there are a lot of people who clicked off, and then I got shadow banned. Hence the song to Hermes asking to help me out. Get my truck back on the road. It's a trucker song to Hermes. And it worked. Soon after that, I had what I'd call viral for me, over 10,000 views on a poem called Laugh at Death. By the way, I may reprise that one. It's been so popular for the Halloween show. It's not really spooky, but it does talk about death. So I thought it was thematically appropriate. Hey, I'm going to take just another pause to breathe and drink. Trucker song to Hermes. Okay. That I'm going to have to go back in the file, but I'm pretty sure I can find it. So give me just a moment. That's a good interlude. You'd think I'd have that prepared. Aha. That would be in the God-bothering file. Specifically work done for divine clients. So here, I'll tell another side story while I'm at it. So I started out with a promise, an offering to Hermes when we started our patronage arrangement. A contract, because he seems to like it that way. And I offered I would write him a poem or song every month to be presented on the 4th, as my usual devotional day, for a year. Well, he got a bargain because I wrote 15 in that year, specifically honoring Hermes, fitting one of his themes aspects, hymns of praise. I'm finding all the others. There it is. Hermes, take the wheel. I wish I could do that one from memory. He'd be very proud if I could, but there's only so much space, like I said. But anyway, this was one of those offerings, and It's a song and a prayer and an offering all in one, because that's convenient. But anyway, I have that one folder that I call my God-bothering folder. Once I got done with the contract to Hermes, that particular set, I started getting inspiration for other Greek deities and characters, particularly villains or misunderstood characters. So I now have poems, some of which have gone on TikTok, for Pandora, Medusa, Icarus. That one's not ready to present yet, but it's coming soon. I know there's at least one more. Oh, Cassandra. I know a couple of my friends have an appreciation of Cassandra's troubles. This was the Greek heroine / cursed mortal who was cursed to foresee the future and always tell the truth about what was going to happen, but have no one believe her. If you think about it, that's an awful curse. But I wrote a poem from her perspective, which will come up later. Thank you, Lillian. All right. So that's enough prelude. Hermes, take the wheel. Do I have my cowboy hat? No, I have my hatter hat. Imagine that I've got the rumpled cowboy hat, black shirt and bolo tie. I was stranded on the side of life's great highway. The troubled world had got me stalled and stuck, till I met my good buddy going my way. Hermes, take the wheel and speed my truck. Oh, Hermes, take the wheel and get me on the road. Without your help I might get in a wreck. There's miles I need to steal and I am towing a heavy load. I'll pay you back when I get my next check. I'm stranded on the information highway. A shadow band has got me stalled and stuck. So I'll look for my good buddy going my way. Hermes, take the wheel and turn my luck. Oh, Hermes, take the wheel and get me on the page. Promotion's harder than I'd realized. There's views I need to steal, but they have locked me in a cage. I'll pay you back when I am monetized. So if you fear your life is going nowhere, with troubles popping up just like roadblocks, just look for my good buddy going your way. Say, Hermes, take the wheel, I'm feeling stuck. Oh, Hermes, take the wheel. Oh, Hermes, take the wheel, because my friends could use your help. The road's blacked up and we cannot progress. There's hearts out there to steal, but I can't make the haul myself. We'll pay you back when you bring us success. We'll pay you back when we get our next check. We'll pay you back, you bet. Sorry for the little stall, but you can tell I like that one. Hopefully you enjoyed as well. So that was all that I had planned for tonight. I will keep in mind how long things go. So for the Halloween show, I will have a couple of scary stories if they run about 15 to 20 minutes each. I didn't want to do anything that goes half hour or more just because of, attention span and people coming in. Oh dear. You my favorite. What's your favorite? Pull out the file again. The Veteran Traveler. Do you remember the title? I'm not sure. There's a couple that to tell that story. I could read it. I don't think I can tell it from memory. That is Yule Ride. That's one I'll plan to do around that time of year, certainly. Okay. These go here. Okay, where is Yule Ride hiding? Or actually, it's called Yule Ride 2, because I'm a sucker for a pun. If I could get into my magazines, that one was actually published in a copy of Oak Leaves, which is the magazine for Arndrachfang, or Art Druid our own druidry, excuse me. It's a modern druidic fellowship that I'm a member of. It's where I do a lot of this ritual work. You're bringing Christmas before Samhain, I know. Before even Thanksgiving. If I can't find it quickly, I will try to tell it from memory. Because that makes interesting stories sometimes. I fill in what I don't remember. Stories. We need the stories. This is lore. Now, this has all the stories from rituals. Which I will share, actually, some of those later on, too. Feel free to ask other questions. I'm sorry about the pause here while I check for that. Ah, this seems to be the right file. The Stacks of Turtles. Inheritance. It's one of my favorites. That one will definitely go on in a future TikTok live. Inheritance is a straight up allegory. Sending a message. Nope, that's a different one. Oh, that's a ghost story. There it is. Yule Ride. Yay. Okay. So I will tell this one. That'll probably be my last thing for the evening. Imagine it'll take another 15 to 20, but hey, settle in. I promise it is a good story, and I do love it. Obviously, Wolf there loves it as well. Yep, Starwolf. I'm pretty sure she's heard it at an event or possibly seen it in Oak Leaves. So this is technically a Christmas or Yule story. Oh, good night, Lillian. You're welcome. There'll be more to come. Like I say, the next one is spooky. I have to decide whether I want to go with a more, Peter Lorre type of voice, or possibly Vincent Price, which I do a terrible impression of, or just the Crypt Keeper, because I can do the puns. Yes, I'm trying to be clever. Stars my beloved, the person whom Freyja brought to me. So, of course, she's heard the story first. All right. Yule Ride 2. Despite the usual stereotypes, Sergeant Amy Mays didn't cuss that often. She found that a sharp eye, a sharper voice, and a swift follow-through did more to enforce discipline than a few dirty words. But she was ready with a choice set of expletives when her rental car died, just past Boxholm. She started by cussing the rental company for giving her an uninspected piece of shit. She swore at the fucking weather for dropping a fucking blizzard shortly after her arrival at fucking Fort Dodge, all along the area between there and Des Moines. She reamed out the shithead meteorologists who had claimed the snow would hold off for half a day, long enough for her to reach Osceola Station to take the train home. She even threw in a couple of choice words for the goddamned army who timed her leave so poorly. The majority of her cussing was served to the scattered drivers who ignored her where she stood, pulled over and dark at the side of the highway. Sergeant Mays had already lost some of her body heat and some of the heat inside the car, trying to figure out and fix the problem. She'd checked fuses, traced wires, looked over the engine. It was just dead, seized up by some unknown car disease. She was still waiting for that rental office to call her back. Their line was going straight to voicemail. They weren't supposed to be closed, but the pimpled jackass who'd rented her the car looked like he was the type to call off on a holiday night. She'd already tried AAA. They were still looking for a tow truck available after 7 p.m. on a Saturday night in rural Iowa in a blizzard. And it might be a while. Surely, someone could come up from Des Moines at the worst. At best, she would probably be stuck at least a couple of hours. Despite the freezing temperatures, that wait was survivable. She already had an insulated uniform jacket, as the winters in Afghanistan got a lot colder than most civilians assumed. The car kept the snow and the wind off her. Trouble was, she was going to have to get out of the car to flag down a ride. She'd be chilled and miserable by the time help arrived. And if it arrived too late, she was going to miss her train. She was going to miss her scheduled train in Osceola at 2000 hours. At the best, she might catch the Zephyr line afterward at Omaha, maybe around 2300. And that was assuming that she could get that far, which was unlikely in this weather. She certainly didn't want to try driving the full 7 hours home in the dark in the snow, after already flying for so many hours. The odds were she was going to have to take a room in Des Moines and try again in the morning. Looks like she wasn't going to get home to her home in central Nebraska until the next day. And one day out of a 3-day furlough was a huge loss. And not to mention, her family didn't even know to expect her coming. She'd wanted it to be a surprise, to show up at the door. They could have spent all of Sunday together, from dawn to dusk, until her husband had to go to work on Monday. Now, even if she called and spoiled the surprise, he'd have to scramble and see if he could call off, if he could even give her Monday, before she rushed back on Tuesday to catch her flight. She hated to miss Christmas Day. But that Wednesday, this was the year it was written, Christmas was on a Wednesday, was when her plane was flying back to Kabul. She had to be grateful for even those few days during the big restructuring push. Losing one day sucked big time. Damn it, if she was stuck much longer, she'd have to call them. And if the storm got worse, she might not even make it home on Monday. As it was, the snow was so heavy that she couldn't see the house lights around her, much less guess which way it would be to walk to a town. Her GPS might have helped, but her reception was sketchy that far from many towns. Sergeant Mays was spared an indecisive wait when a vehicle finally stopped. To her surprise, it was not a passenger vehicle nor a freight truck, but an 8-track MEV, a medevac transport. It might have been heading out of Fort Dodge, possibly for airlift. Amy had seen a few of the armored support vehicles in the field, but not many stateside, not on the highway. I'll pause, by the way. Dan, if you're still there, I apologize for any inconsistencies. I tried to do my research as best as I could. I'm a military brat, but it's Air Force, not Army. All right, back to the story. The blocky transport chunked to a stop a few meters ahead of her car, handling the snowy shoulder just as easily as it handled sand. Thanks. Got an endorsement. The driver's hatch eventually popped open and a head emerged. Unlike an active duty driver, this one wasn't wearing a helmet, just a green cap. The driver hoisted themselves up and waved Sergeant Mays over, but held up a hand when Amy got close. "You stuck?" cried a woman's voice. Squinting through the snow, Sergeant Mays could just make out a pale face and a fringe of golden yellow hair. Yeah, she shouted back. "My engine's dead, not sure why. Rental, just out from Fort Dodge. You heading that way?" There was a long and uncomfortable pause. "Technically, I shouldn't even be stopping or talking to you. I'm afraid I cannot give you my ID or my destination. I'm not even able to pick up a passenger either, even if you are in the service. I'm sorry." "Hell, why did you stop then?" "Well, this is a medevac. I could have given you first aid or care if you were hurt. Nothing says I can't call for support either. Actually, I have someone in mind. A friend of mine. A civilian, but reliable. And he's in the area. I'll give him a shout and send him your direction. Are you trying to get back to the fort?" Amy thought a moment, tamping down her irritation. It wasn't the woman's fault if she was under orders. She answered, Actually, no, I'm trying to get to Osceola. I got a train at 2000 hours I'm not going to make. If your friend can get me to Omaha by 2300, I'd be much obliged. The rental company can come get their piece of junk where it died." The driver saluted and called back. "Should be doable. Just hang on there a while longer. I'll see if I can raise and get you an ETA." She ducked back down into the compartment. Sergeant Mays stood by, shivering despite her best efforts, wondering if she should return to her car or keep waiting for the med. After 3 minutes or so, the driver hauled herself back up. "Good news, bad news. He can get you there and maybe on time. It's going to take him about a half hour to turn around and get up here, though." Sergeant Mays nodded. "Usually I'd say don't go to so much trouble, but right now," she let the thought blow away in the wind. I hear you. I'm sorry again, I can't do more. You should be all right, though. He is a good guy. Definitely willing and able to help you. He's a little rough, I'll warn you. But watch out for a rig across the highway. He'll be coming the opposite way. I think he said he's hauling tonight, so there'll be a trailer. Trucker? Sergeant Mays asked, to clarify. Right. Deliveries to make, even in this weather. Especially in this weather. Don't worry, he actually drives better in the snow. Amy had her doubts, but she wasn't in any position to argue, much less to turn down a ride. All right, thanks again. You're welcome. Joyce Yule? Yeah, happy holidays. Sergeant Mays watched as the driver dropped back down. When the MEV's engine revved back to life, she stepped away and returned to her car. That had been a strange meeting in several respects, but if the promised ride manifested, she could forgive weirdness. The chilled woman went back inside the car and huddled down in the driver's seat, wishing the rental had come with an emergency blanket. They really should carry those in the winter. Then again, that would be admitting their cars could break down in the middle of a storm. She fought the urge to keep checking her phone while she waited, trying to avoid wasting its remaining battery. Without a clock, though, the time seemed to stretch. She couldn't rest, not wanting to drift off to sleep. Besides being a bad idea in the cold, the sergeant didn't want to miss her ride. So she sat staring into the whiteness, watching the headlights pass by, trying to spot a pair of them slowing and stopping. It seemed like well past that promised half hour when she finally succumbed to temptation and looked at her phone again. 2016. In reality, only 15 minutes had passed. If this guy didn't show, then what? She couldn't do much to an unknown, unnamed truck driver who'd failed to show as promised. She could curse him for all the good that did. If he didn't show up, she'd go back to flagging cars, a little colder and a little more tired. But at some point, she'd have to consider maybe walking. The exposure and exhaustion could be dangerous, but moving around might warm her up some. And her best bet was to hike back to the fort. That was still something like 20 clicks back. That was a tough hike in bad conditions. Wait or walk? What was the worst choice? She kept turning the question over in her mind, which suggested how tired she was getting. She was at least aware enough to notice her decline. What was that nonsense about cold sharpening the senses? Not that she was cold, not hypothermic. Not yet. Just a little. Sergeant Mays was nearly ready to jump out and either hitchhike more aggressively or take her chances walking when she saw a line of lights across the highway, slowing and stopping. It took her a few blinks to be certain, but finally the image resolved into the running lights of a semi-truck and trailer. With a burst of adrenaline, Amy grabbed her go bag and shoved open the door. She managed to remember to close and lock the car before scrambling across the icy road toward the median. It took her a little effort to get over the guardrails, across the snowbound mid-lane, and back over the opposite side, but the truck didn't move. Either the driver could see her coming, or he was being patient. That he'd stopped at the right place at all was a minor miracle in itself. Halfway across the highway, Sergeant Mays couldn't even see her own car anymore. She had to wait for one car to pass. It figured, one of the very few out there, and it got in her way, before she could cross over to the truck. Her legs were burning from the abrupt activity after sitting so long in the cold, but it felt good to have her blood racing again. Amy realized just how drowsy she had become as the panic and the exercise brought her awake. In the rush, she'd been thinking only of rescue, not of problems with the rescuer. An endorsement from a stranger, even a fellow soldier, was no guarantee of safety. When she got to the truck's passenger door and hauled it open, indeed, Sergeant Mays paused at what she found inside. First, there was a waft of alcohol. Never a good sign in a vehicle, especially a big rig, especially driving in winter conditions. There was a metallic smell too, like rust or blood. And second, the cab was a mess, stained with spills of what was hopefully cola, scattered with crumbs, littered with balled-up fast food wrappers and receipts. Third, the driver was intimidating. The first thing she noticed was his beard. It was a fully invested beard, long and thick. It was silvery gray with a few dark streaks. Surprisingly, in contrast to the vehicle, it looked pretty clean, with no stains or crumbs. The face beneath was clean too, but worn, lined with wrinkles, spotted with age, and scratched with a few obvious scars. Amy guessed the man's nose had been broken at least once as well. It was a heavily used face. The man's hands matched his face, crisscrossed with keloids that suggested a long career punching walls covered in broken glass. His clothing wasn't nearly as torn up, but it was threadbare in places. He didn't have a coat. There was an old gray blanket stretched across the seat behind him. His thick chest, gut, and arms were barely covered by a hand-knitted sweater in a spiky pattern of red, black, and white. It looked like abstract antlers. Below the sweater were a pair of baggy black canvas pants, tucked into the tops of incongruously shiny black boots. When he turned to look at the guest entering his domain, the man's eyes shone strangely in the cab's lights, and one of his eyelids hung still while the other rose along with its eyebrow. Amy could see the logo on his black trucker cap. It was a silhouette of Zach Galifianakis from The Hangover, with the slogan, "One Man Wolfpack." Ooh, tea spill. I'll leave it on the cloth. I'll take that as a warning. Be nice. "Coming in," he boomed, outshouting the howling wind. "You're in a hurry, I thought." He didn't say thought, though, as much as thought. He had an odd accent she couldn't place. It almost sounded like Minnesotan, but not quite. Sergeant Mays realized she had been caught staring. Fuck it. If she was competent to take down a Daesh fighter in hand-to-hand, she could handle Grandpa Trucker, even if he did look like his first job had been Lou Ferrigno's stunt double. She hauled herself into the cab, wedging her bag into the space behind the passenger seat. "Sorry. I'm, just winded. I was stuck there for a while in the cold. Thank you, by the way. Do you still think you can get me to Omaha by 11? At least to Des Moines. I might be able to get a bus from there instead." "I think I can get you home on time. You from thereabouts, Omaha?" Even after she had closed the door, he kept shouting. The reason for his volume became more obvious as he shifted up the truck's engine. A thunderous roar shook the cab, followed by a nauseating lurch as he turned onto the roadway. Further, a town called McCook?" In Nebraska," Amy offered, not sure how much personal detail she should share. "I was supposed to catch the train in Osceola. That's why the timing concern. If I miss this ride, it'll probably be tomorrow before I get home at best. I'm on a 3-day pass, so that day counts a lot. They'll expect me back soon." If her fatigues, and his friend hadn't clued him in, that last part should be a reminder he was dealing with a soldier, someone who could defend herself, and someone who would be noticed if she didn't report back on time. His eyes stayed on the road, but his beard split in a sudden grin. "I hear you. Days go by so easy. Sometimes you miss their passing, especially days like this, where the sun doesn't show. Home, family, the moments of peace. Those are the days that shouldn't pass so easily, but they do, the same as the rest." Amy relaxed a little. The conversation, like its setting, was still strange, but the man wasn't giving off any creeper vibes, none she could detect. He was also driving just as well as advertised. Despite the heavy snow, he was coming up to speed, already passing 55. If he could maintain that rate, given the distance left, Sergeant Mays just might make her train, maybe with a couple minutes to spare. They do," she agreed. "And the days you'd like to skip drag on forever." The gleam from his teeth vanished. He answered, "Can't say as I've had that many days I'd like to skip. Even the worst days are worth having. Once they've all flown, you'd take the bad ones back if it meant one more day alive. I could agree that the bad days come back to memory more often, though. That might make them seem longer." Sergeant Mays bristled. No offense, sir, but it doesn't sound like you've had the same kind of bad days I have. For some people, it was their last day alive. I'd skip past those days if I could. His smile returned, but just at the lips. I wouldn't go assuming. If you mean war, I've seen a few fights. Some deaths, too. Some very, very bad days. Amy backtracked a bit. I'm sorry, did you serve? I fought. I led. If you mean an army, then no. I never wore a uniform. But no disrespect to those who hold ranks. I'd guess you're a soldier? Sergeant, maybe? Yes, sir. Sergeant Amy Mays. Good guess. Call me Walter. I'm around these bases regularly. These days, I mostly run deliveries. I think I had a little spill there because he wanted me to do the accent. All right. Amy looked out the window, seeing only an occasional light streaking through the icy static. She wasn't sure how much conversation she really wanted to have with this dangerous-looking man, but so far he hadn't set off any alarms. No inappropriate comments, no remarks on her gender or her looks, not even a rude word. He was rough-looking and larger than life, but so what? Would she have been equally nervous if he was a scrawny, clean-shaven young man? Or a woman just as scruffy? Any person could be a threat, really. She decided to stay friendly but share as little as possible. If she could keep him talking about himself, that was less time he'd have to ask about her. She said, deliveries. Where to? Around this area or across country? Walter chuckled. All over. Wherever I'm needed. Worlds wide if necessary. It just happened I was in these parts tonight. Well, what do you usually deliver? I'm afraid that's classified. Sergeant Mays fell silent until she caught the hint in his voice. You're joking with me. His laugh knocked crumbs off the dashboard. Sorry, I can't help it. Soldiers are too easy sometimes. It's only half a joke, though. I've run some cargo I can't discuss. Some of the rest I honestly don't know what I'm hauling. Toys, garden gnomes. I do know it's not explosive or corrosive, but that's about it. You don't have to know, like have a manifest? Oh, there's a list, yeah. I check it sometimes, but it's mostly the customer's concerns. I just make sure the loads get where they're supposed to be. I suppose that's one way to do it. Sergeant Mays paused a moment, unsure what question to ask next. Her hesitation gave him an opening. Delivery's just one job. I've had a few others. How about you? Were you always a soldier? Did you go straight in after school? Amy tried not to let her concern show. No, sir, not quite. I majored in computer science. I didn't like it. Too much time in the dark, in a chair, doing something repetitive. The Army was offering a good signing bonus, so for people with my tech background. She hadn't meant to say so much, but she stopped short of explaining just how her skills had been used in the field. Fortunately, she provided enough information to satisfy him and get him started again. I can understand that. The open sky called you, didn't it? The sky, and the sun, and the sea. Nothing wrong with knowing all the codes, but the world isn't in those lines. You chose well, I would say. The cab's heater had thawed Amy enough to be comfortable, and she grew less concerned with offending her rescuer. Well, I'm glad you approve, she shot back, but I have seen enough sun and sky, and the seas for sailors. At this point, a desk chair is starting to look good. I get to work closer to home for one thing. About 7,000 miles closer. 7,000, huh? That's quite a ways. And then you're stuck on the last 400 or so. Isn't that how it always goes? It's not the start of the voyage that's hard going. It's the end. She said, you'd know better than me. See the world is just marketing copy. I've mostly just been over here and over there. Vultures nodded. You got me there. I couldn't even begin to tally the distances I've covered. It's some ridiculous number, I imagine. Where did you start? Where are you from? Amy asked, not just pushing the conversation back to him, but genuinely interested. He waved a hand toward the window. Oh, a long, long way away. You go north, across the water, and then keep going. It was a deliberately weird answer. Sergeant Mays wasn't sure if he was dodging the question or playing some game. Come to think of it, it felt like he'd been playing around the whole time. She was trying not to say too much herself to protect military security. But what was his reason to be so clever and evasive? While she was thinking, she put together the pieces and realized what he was doing. She decided to play along. Wait, you're from somewhere way up north? You make deliveries all around the world? You're good driving in the snow? And the beard? Are you Santa Claus? His laughter rolled like thunder in the small space. Amy was sure she'd never heard anyone laugh so loud. I'm not going to try it. I'll hurt myself. It wasn't a ho, ho, ho kind of laugh, though. The sound came from his chest and his throat, not a belly full of jelly. His laugh had a bit of a horse's bray to it, and a rough edge that fit his scars. Walter slapped a hand against the steering wheel. You know, I get that a lot. I can't imagine why. He waited to see if she had a smart comeback ready. When none came, he shook his head. All right, you got me. I like to play the part, especially this time of year. I've got the look for it, don't you think? Sort of, she said. Like if Santa really did fight the Martians? Another peal of amusement. I'll have to remember that. So where are you from, really? You have an interesting accent. Oh, all over. I've moved around a lot, and the history can get mixed up. I could say I'm from Frost, or Red Tree Falls, or Pillager, or Savage, maybe even Scandia, Vining, Green Isle, Oslo, Uppsala. So from all over Minnesota, right? He neither confirmed nor denied, but he lapsed into a concentrated silence, suddenly intent on the road. Sergeant Mays looked ahead of her and shuddered despite the warmth. How could he even follow the road in these conditions, much less be comfortable at full speed? Despite his tight squint, he must have amazing eyesight, probably well trained for so much time on the road. He broke the quiet with a grim question. You're going home to celebrate with family. Sergeant Mays, do you think much about the possibility that you won't come home someday? She turned sharply from the window, trying to read his intent. It sounded like a serious question, tactless but honestly meant. Sergeant Mays answered him honestly. I try not to think about it. I do my best to make every moment count, especially every moment I have with them. I'm aware of the risks, but thinking about death too much spoils the good time, makes it bitter. Is there a reason you ask? Walter nodded. You're not the first soldier I've carried home, but you're the most conversational. Sometimes I drive a different sort of delivery. I have brought many warriors back home to rest, forever. When I got my call from my friend at the base, I was concerned it was another of that sort of pickup. Amy caught on and understood his roundabout phrasing. No, fortunately not. I can understand how that might be difficult work, especially if you think about it too much. Thank you, for them and for me, and for caring enough that it obviously bothers you. Usually after a few brushes with death, people either harden up or decide they can't handle it. They're cowards either way, Walter rumbled. But, hey, I didn't mean to bring you down. It just crossed my mind to ask, to make sure you're not taking anything for granted. Never. Though I suppose I can't complain about the occasional memento mori. Sergeant Mays looked out the window. Still in these kind of conditions, we should probably keep our minds off of our mortality. Walter shook his head. Nah. I find the darker my thoughts, the brighter reality looks in comparison. Not many might agree these days, but it's always worked for me. Are you getting concerned about my driving now? No, sir, you seem to be handling that just fine. Impressively, even. Of course, I say that not knowing we're still on the highway or maybe ice road trucking across Deer Creek. Not that bad. If you want, I could slow down or stop for a rest break. But it seemed like you were in a rush. Besides, I think we're almost there. There was no working clock on the cab's dashboard. Sergeant Mays pulled out her phone and checked the time. 22:23. Almost 2 hours in the truck. How had it been that long? It didn't feel like they'd been talking or sitting for 2 hours. Wow, I didn't even see Des Moines, she said, putting the phone away. It must be blanketed. I'm surprised they haven't shut down the roads. To her alarm, Walter looked away from the road, driving while facing her directly. He winked his unscarred eye and replied, "Tell you the truth, they did close the roads." Before Sergeant Mays could react to this unsafe driving or to his admission, the driver reached for the knob and shifted down. It looked like an intricate process, so she held off on her complaints. Was he slowing down to make her more comfortable? Was he stopping to give her the option in case she wanted to get out? That did make sense. He might be willing to drive illegally, but an active officer shouldn't encourage such misbehavior. If they were pulled over for violating a curfew, being in the passenger seat would only marginally reduce her culpability. Then again, if the conditions really were that bad, maybe she should stay. Actually, now that he was slowing, she could see streetlights around them. He must have pulled off to a rest stop or maybe into a small town. He continued to slow and shifted down again. She grunted. If we're almost there, I guess I'd rather not stop and get you stuck. If you think you could make it the whole way, safely. Walter turned and winked, then winced in mock offense. If? We're here. Sergeant Mays looked out the passenger window again. A row of houses trotted past, slower and slower as the truck continued to shed speed. Even if they were nearing Omaha, they couldn't be anywhere close to the train station. Oh, we're pretty close, you mean? Still, that's impressive driving. I didn't even notice us turning off the interstate. Then she looked again. The streets looked more familiar than would have been the case in Omaha. They looked really familiar. What the? How are we in fucking McCook? As they slowed still further, the snow was less of a visual barrier, and Amy could tell that was, indeed, where they were. Her street, her home street, in goddamn central Nebraska. That was literally impossible. I said I would get you home on time, Walter chuckled. I'm the best driver on the road, especially in winter. I know all the shortcuts. There is no shortcut that covers 400 miles in 2 hours. Who said it was 2 hours? It's the solstice night, Sergeant. The sun stands still. It takes a break. We just didn't stop with it. On that cue, the trucker slowed to a crawl, then finally stopped, shifted into park, and flipped on the brakes. The truck hissed to a rest. Amy looked inside, and it was absolutely her house. She could spot her husband's SUV just starting to disappear beneath piling snow. She looked back. Walter was turned the other way, waving at a passing pickup that was weaving around his semi on the crowded street. Sergeant Mays turned it over in her mind, but she still couldn't put together a solution. 100 questions were trying to go from her mind to her mouth, and blocking one another with their haste. She suspected, though, that any question she asked would get the same sort of evasive, riddling answer he'd given before. But she was home. Her family was inside that house, asleep on Saturday night. As much as she might really want to interrogate Walter, her desire to slip inside and wake her family was much stronger. I don't know what you did or how you did it, but thank you. Again, she remembered to reach back and pull out her duffel. Is there any way I can pay you back? I could get your number and we'll talk later? He raised a battered hand. I'm difficult to reach most times. Though, if you see my friend, that's Val, passing your way, you might send a message through her. You want to pay me back? Live well. Be glad of every day, including the hardest ones, especially the hardest ones. It is better to be riding up front with me than riding in the back, eh? He jerked a thumb to the rear of the truck for emphasis. If I hadn't come along when I did, you might be as frozen as they are. She shuddered. Can't argue with that. All right, Walter, have it your way. I'll do that. Have a happy holiday, sir. Joyous Yule, Sergeant. Sergeant Mays stepped down carefully from the cab, minding her footing on the icy step and the icier sidewalk. When she looked up again, she could see a light switching on inside the house. Walter toggled off his parking brake and adjusted his cap, pointedly looking forward and on down the street. With a last smile and a shake of her head, Amy closed the passenger door and stepped down and away. She heard the truck's engine roar as she walked to her front door. With a rumble that shook the windows up and down the street, the 18-wheeled beast rolled away. Sergeant Mays rang her doorbell and waited to see whom she would amaze first. Thank you for listening. Yule Ride 2. I'm glad for the request. I enjoy that story. Oh, we got one coming in. Dr. Textbooks, hello. Welcome. Did I miss any commentary? Dirty Contractor. Yeah, I hear you on that. Okay. Thank you. Hail, Walter. Yes. Like I say, there is a whole subgenre of journeys in the snow on Christmas, and even a few Odin as Santa stories. But I just thought of that one. I thought, yeah, there's a feat that both of them can pull off. A little shortcut traveling, especially on that shortest of days and longest of nights. All right, it is 8:30. I'll keep an eye as I clean up here for any last minute questions, but I'm about wrapping up. Let me mention, if there's anybody here that didn't hear my previous announcement, of course you'll see another TikTok video about this. I'm going to come back again next Thursday, again at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's the 28th, just a little before Samhain. And that will be my second, I'll call it TikTok Unalive. Specifically, scary stories, poems, and a song. All horror themed, Halloween themed. Though, with a twist. Some of them have a little bit of mythology rolled in. I am planning other live shows to follow that. It might not be immediately the week after. Post a little content in between and then see when I have, yes, Eastern time, Eastern US, EST. So my time is currently just about 8:40 for reference. All right. Thank you once again. I know I've said it a few times. Can't be said enough. And keep a watch on my TikTok. There'll be more announcements. Hopefully I can figure out how to set a live event. That function did not appear on my account. I'm hoping that it'll show up after this first live. But, as soon as it does, or if I can find it, I will use that and put announcements in advance. I'll do these videos, as long as I can keep composing poems for them. If you hadn't noticed, I don't like to post anything that's not done in verse of some kind. It's just something I decided when I set up the account originally. So these lives are the sole exception where I'll be in prose. But again, it's for storytelling, it's for conversation. But I'm going to try to keep every video, including the announcements, including the thank yous, in verse. Usually rhyming. Okay. Thanks again. I finished my tea, mostly on the table, but every poetry is tapped out in the house. No. I don't know if you mean exhausted, but there's an infinite supply. Hey, I'm working with so many muses and beings of inspiration. Oh, taped in the house. Okay. I was going to say, because I literally wrote a poem about that infinite inspiration. But no, like I say, I've got I've got a growing client list as people showing up and going, write about me. Absolutely. Give me the ideas, give me the verse, and I will present for you. Who's there? Anna Rodriguez, I see you. Thank you. Hopefully you enjoyed. I think that's it. Like I say, I drank enough of the tea that I really need to get to the bathroom. So have a good night. Be blessed, everyone. And I am very glad, and I'll see you again next week or in a future week.